Welcome to Frank Buckley Interviews. Tonight, a former U.S. Army Green Beret who stands during the playing of the national anthem, but who suggested to Colin Kaepernick that he take a knee. Nate Boyer is my guest.
Frank Buckley Interviews starts now.
Nate Boyer had served tours of duty in Iraq and in Afghanistan as a Green Beret, and then he'd walked onto the football team at the University of Texas and was signed briefly to the Seattle Seahawks. And when Boyer learned that Kaepernick was sitting in protest during the playing of the national anthem, he wrote an open letter to the quarterback in the Army Times.
I wanted him to just understand where it was coming from and why it hurt me and why it was hurting people in the community, but also I wanted to understand where he's coming from and what his goals were, what that looked like. Because I wanted to work with him together on finding a solution, bringing our country back together while also addressing these issues, right? That was my goal.
How did the Take a Knee protests begin? How did Nate's fellow warriors react? And what's the state of the relationship between Nate Boyer and Colin Kaepernick today? My conversation with Nate Boyer when we come back. Nate, it's great to have you back.
It's good to be back.
So much has happened in the 2 years since you first met Colin Kaepernick. We're into an NFL season again. It's still an issue, the national anthem. And does that surprise you?
No, but a lot of it is the way the story's kind of been spun. And I'm not just talking about by the mainstream media. I'm just talking about by social media, but just by everybody. You know, like the narrative continues to be the protest of the anthem instead of like a protest during the national anthem, you know, which was the original intent from Colin and from many other players over the last couple of years. But that's why, I mean, it's a divisive issue. It's a divisive topic even, and even the protest, you know, what it's really for, social injustices, police brutality, flaws in the criminal justice system. There's you know, debatable points in that too. So it's tough, and we're still at this point where it feels like we're so binary and we have to like pick a side and, you know, blue or red, left or right. And until we kind of get past that, and until I think the voices of reason, the maybe 70-80% of us that are somewhere in the middle, get opportunities like you're giving me to speak out on this thing, you know, it's going to continue to kind of be that narrative. Like,
Yeah.
Are you patriotic or are you open-minded? Like, you can't be both.
We live in this society now where everyone feels like they have to win.
Oh yeah.
You can't have a civilized conversation with someone.
It's all about being right, proving the other person wrong. And yeah, we get to this, you know, we dig our heels in and we're in this position where the most important thing is for somebody else to concede, you know, than for us to move forward together. And until we grow up and mature past that, because we're very immature right now as a nation, or we're acting that way anyway, we're just going to keep spinning our wheels in the same position, and nothing's going to really change for either side. You know what I mean? We're just going to keep pulling apart.
And that was really the point, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you first met with Colin Kaepernick. And again, 2 years ago, you heard about him sitting down during the national anthem, during an exhibition game. You're a former Green Beret. You had trained with the Seattle Seahawks, played a game, preseason game with them. And you did what? For folks who aren't familiar with the story, what happened next?
Yeah, I mean, he was sitting down during the anthem, and his original quote was, you know, "I'm not going to stand for the flag of a country that oppresses black people and people of color." And for me, you know, that flag does not represent that. That's not what it's supposed to represent anyway. And that's it's an important symbol, and not just to our country here, but for many abroad, and especially the developing world. It's like this beacon of hope, you know, and this idea that everybody has a fair shot, a fair shake. That being said, I don't believe that is absolutely true yet in our country. We're still recovering from many, many years of oppression and, you know, deep-rooted racism and some horrible things. And we're doing a lot better, you know, and the civil rights movement was a huge part of that. But there's still a fight to be fought. So I don't disagree with the intentions and the meaning behind it. It was just that platform, that the flag itself, I don't believe it stands for oppression. And so that was hard for me. So my initial reaction was, I was very upset, and I was like, you don't understand. You don't haven't experienced or seen what I've seen, and it's true, he hasn't. But I haven't seen or experienced what he's seen either, and so.
And you had,
I had to
just
take a step back,
for
really.
folks to understand what you had seen, you had been on multiple deployments as a Green Beret.
Right.
You've been around the world, combat veteran, and served our nation. And for anyone who's around the military, that flag means something in a profound way. And so it annoyed you, and people knew that, and they were coming to you asking for your comments, and you initially sort of begged off.
Yeah, I mean, what we do when we're over there as Green Berets, we're fighting for those that can't fight for themselves. Our actual motto is De Oppresso Libere, which means to free the oppressed. So that word oppression means something pretty intense to me, And as you said, I was approached by a lot of publications to write something, to speak out, to go do interviews, and and explain. I think people were looking for or expecting me to say, this is why you should stand. You know what I mean? And instead, with where we were at as a country, I didn't think that was going to help anything. And so instead of an op-ed, I wrote an open letter.
And I've got a copy of it, and let me just quote from it so that folks know what you said in the Army Times. You wrote, "Unfortunately, I also know that racism still exists in our country, as it does in every other country on this planet, and I hate that I know that. I'm not judging you for standing up for what you believe in. It's your inalienable right. What you are doing takes a lot of courage, and I'd be lying if I said I knew what it was like to walk around in your shoes. I've never had to deal with prejudice because of the color of my skin, and for me to say I can relate to what you've gone through is as ignorant as someone who's never been in a combat zone telling me they understand what it's like to go to war. I look forward to the day you're once again inspired to stand during our national anthem. I'll be standing right there next to you. Keep on trying." And then you put the motto for the Green Berets, De Oppresso Liber. And you wrote that. It appeared in the Army Times. And then what happened?
I woke up in the morning and my phone had, my voicemail box was full. My email had 100 emails, and it was cool, but it was very stressful at the same time because it was reactions from all across the board. But for the most part, and I always forget this, and I think we forget this as a country, that most of the reaction was positive. And the reason it was getting shared so much was it was positive, right? And yes, there was people from kind of both sides of things on the far left and the far right that sort of attacked or disagreed with what I had to say or what I was standing for. But the popularity of that letter was 10 times as much notoriety as I got for playing with the Seahawks, being the oldest rookie in NFL history, and this story of this guy that never played football before and walked on in college and all that, which I think is a pretty cool story.
It is a cool story. And again, let me just back up
No,
for
but it's
folks
all
who
right.
don't know that. You had walked on at the University of Texas as a long snapper after your military service. You were 29, I believe.
Right. That's right.
Made the team, played for the team, starred for the team as a long snapper.
As much as a long snapper can star, yeah.
Well, people appreciated your service, and I think that you became a star because of who you were and the service that you provided, and then making the team as an older guy.
Yeah.
And
We
then
can relate to that.
And then had a chance to walk on signed as a free agent for the Seattle Seahawks. And there's that iconic shot of you coming out onto the field with the American flag. So that's sort of the backdrop.
Yeah.
And so continue your story.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting backdrop because the only other time I was on the field for the anthem was because in the college we're in the locker room when that happens, was in Seattle for that one NFL game, and I'm in my uniform and I broke down and cried because it was just a powerful moment. That song resonates with me, and a lot of people that wore the camouflage and people that didn't too. But also it was this culmination of everything I'd kind of worked for, and that was my American dream, and it came true because I worked hard and didn't quit and didn't give up. I mean, that's what the flag represents to me, that opportunity, right? And no matter what color of my skin, I think anybody would have had that opportunity or potential if they were willing to sacrifice and work for it, right? And so, we get to this, and And yeah, that morning was it was pretty wild. I didn't know how to react to it. I didn't know how to respond to everything. All these media requests, and I didn't want to do anything right away because if I go on CNN or if I go on Fox News or I pick one of these, it's like I'm going to get thrown into this box or grouped with these people and like, oh, that's what he believes. That's who he is. He's a liberal. He's a conservative. He's a label.
Yeah.
And I just was afraid of that because I'm like, that's the opposite of what I'm trying to do.
You don't want to be used.
No. I call it the radical middle. I call it the alt middle. I call it like whatever you want to call it. But it's an awkward place to sort of stand these days, common ground is super uncommon. And so what I finally agreed to do was the NFL Network, because it wasn't a political, network. And I worked with them before. I knew some of those people. I felt comfortable. So I was like, all right, I'll do an exclusive interview with them that afternoon. And I'm in the green room waiting to go on. And then Colin's publicist called me and said, he read your letter. He was moved by it and he wants to sit down with you tomorrow. And I didn't tell anybody about that. I confided with Jay Glazer, who's been a really good friend of mine, and helped me out through a lot through this whole process. And, some family about what do you think I should do? And they were like, I think you should take the meeting, like sit down with them. And I was like, all right. I was just concerned about it being maybe a publicity stunt, or I didn't know. Yeah. So I went down to San Diego the next morning. They're playing the Chargers. It's the final preseason game of 2016. And, he's sat for 2 games now, maybe 3. It's been this crazy week of like, what's he going to do? Is he going to continue to protest? And we met in the lobby of the team hotel, Colin and I, and Eric Reed joined us, and we talked for a couple of hours.
And were you trying to convince him to stand, or?
No, I did not go down there with that in mind at all. I wanted him to just understand where it was coming from and why it hurt me and why it was hurting people in the community. But also, I wanted to understand where he's coming from and what his goals were, what that looked like. Because I wanted to work with him together on finding a solution, bringing our country back together, while also addressing these issues. Right. That was my goal. And through that conversation. And sharing both of our experiences, both of our reactions from our various communities, he sort of asked me towards the end, is there a different way do you think that I can demonstrate, that I can protest, that's not going to offend people in your community, military community specifically? He said, because I'm not going to stand. I've vowed I'm not going to stand until I see changes. And I asked him, are there measurable goals for what that looks like? And at that time, anyway, he didn't really have it. I think it blew up way bigger than he thought, just like my letter did. Way bigger than I thought it would. And so we ended up sort of kicking around ideas about what to do, And I came up with this concept of kneeling alongside his teammates. I thought being next to his teammates was the most important thing. I thought sitting on the bench, isolated, looked a little bit like you don't care, or you're making it about you, or I don't know. It wasn't inspiring. And, he agreed doing something alongside his teammates was probably important, whether they agree with him or not. That's your team. It's your society. It's your tribe in a sense, and you're the leader of it as a quarterback. And so then I suggested kneeling, just because it was the next best thing in my mind, in my opinion, to standing. People need to take a knee to pray, to propose, to get knighted. You bow in front of the king and queen like that. When a player's hurt on the field in the game, players take a knee. And when we visit a fallen brother's grave, we often take a knee out of respect and spend some time. It's just never been seen in the history of mankind, as far as I know, as a disrespectful act. And he agreed that was actually more powerful than sitting. And that night, he did that for the first time against the Chargers down there for that game, and to the smattering of boos in the audience, while the anthem was played and sung by an African-American Navy sailor. And
by the way, you stood.
I stood next to him. Yeah, I told him I would do that if he would take this step. I would take a step too and show that I'm with you on this, and I'm supporting your openness to adjust in some way. And and I want to work together. Whether even though we don't have the same experience and we don't necessarily see eye to eye on everything, it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean we can't move forward together.
So that photo of you standing right next to him, your hand on your heart, I believe, and he's on his knee.
Yep. As well as Eric Reed. I should note that
Right.
Eric joined him that night, but go ahead.
National anthem is playing. That photo goes around the world. That video goes around the world. Then what happens?
I mean, we stayed in contact through that whole season, through the Super Bowl, and I always let him know like I was willing to work with him, but I only wanted to do it if we were going to reach across to those on the other side of where he was kneeling, meaning law enforcement and people that maybe have different values, different political views, and engage in more of those conversations because our country needs to see that. We need to see people that we couldn't, maybe we couldn't even imagine would have a respectful conversation, actually have one. Because I think when you get people in the same room and they're not on social media and they're not doing some sort of a campaign, it's different. People are more sensitive to one another. We treat each other like human beings, but we're in this digital age where we don't have to do that. We can just sit behind some emoji and, preach hate and
go off on each other.
Yeah, go off on each other. And it's like embarrassing. It's just silly that we're at that place right now in society.
So that season continues, it ends, and then Colin Kaepernick's out of a job. And as you know, he has since filed suit and says that he is being blackballed. Have you talked to him about that, or when was the last time you talked to him?
No, I haven't talked to him about that. I haven't talked to him in over a year now, actually. Ever since, I think he started to. Obviously, he's a huge image. You know what I mean? A pop icon that people are rallying behind. The Sports Illustrated, I think the Muhammad Ali Award and cover of Time Magazine, the Amnesty International Award, and obviously recently the Nike campaign, like all these things. I mean, his profile is much bigger than my profile, so I understand.
Where are you now? What are you doing now, Nate?
Yeah, so something that's been really special to me ever since I got done playing is this idea that I've done these things. I competed at the highest level in the military and also in football. And how can I continue to not only inspire people to chase those American dreams of their own, but also specifically people that wore those uniforms, help them continue to find purpose as I continue to try to find mine once the uniform comes off. And so, speaking of Jay Glazer, we started a nonprofit. It'll be 3 years now in December, and it's called Merging Vets and Players. We call it MVP for short. And we're bringing together former professional athletes and combat veterans and helping them find service and continued purpose as they move forward out of that transition. The similarities are pretty incredible when you look at the locker room, the camaraderie, how short-lived those careers can be. Obviously, we're never going to compare combat to professional sports, but it's that same type of warrior mindset that you really need to move forward. And so, we've got MVP in Los Angeles where we started, but we've also opened chapters in Las Vegas and Chicago, and we have New York and Philadelphia and Atlanta next. And our goal is to have it exist in at least every NFL city, if not beyond that, and reach out to as many of these men and women, that not only serve their country, but that, that did something, quite unique and special and elite, and to use what they learned through that, the skills they acquired, to move forward with the next phase in their life and find that next challenge and goal and go chase it.
Has it worked out the way you had hoped it would? Are athletes and military veterans able to connect, and are they helping each other?
Yeah, I mean, there's this kind of special mutual respect that they have for one another that you don't see in a lot of professions, and I think it's because they know both are very. It's very tough to get at that level, and you have to sacrifice quite a bit and work incredibly hard to get there. But also, that limelight or that appreciation. We get to thank you for your service. They get to play sports on this big stage. Once it's gone and you feel that disconnection from all of that, it's like you go from an extreme high to an extreme low. So they recognize that in one another. You know what I mean? They see that simulator and walking the walk together is very easy for them to do. I don't even know if I've seen a situation where yet through our men and women where they just didn't feel somewhat like they had something in common. You know what I mean? Which is really powerful. And we look up to athletes. Young kids do, but people in the military do as well. We love. When I was overseas, I used to watch football games any chance I got, even if it was 5 a.m, because it was like, it's a very uniquely American thing, that competitiveness in sports, but also it was an escape for me. You know what I mean? And I loved always, even as a player, how I could look up in the stands and people of all different backgrounds and politics and skin colors, like, they're wearing the same uniforms and they're hugging on each other in the stands when their team makes a big play. They don't care about any of that stuff. They kind of put it aside. So that's a special thing. It's very American.
Nate, it's always great to see you, and it's trite, but I do appreciate your service and everything you've done for the country.
Thank you, Frank. I appreciate that.
All right. My thanks to Nate Boyer for a terrific conversation. If you'd like to hear the entire uncut conversation, check out the Frank Buckley Interviews podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including Google Play and iTunes and the KTLA5 News app. I appreciate your feedback on social media. If you'd like to tag me, I'm Frank Buckley TV on Twitter and on Instagram, and there's a Frank Buckley Facebook page as well. If you'd like to share this broadcast with your friends and family around the world, we post the show to YouTube on Mondays. Just search for Frank Buckley Interviews, Nate Boyer. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.